Welcome to Sounds of Resistance channel. The Russian army is looking for a hole in Ukraine. Ukrainian warriors are attacking with all their might to regain dominance in the regions occupied by the Russians in Ukraine. The Russian army cannot resist Zelensky's army and they just hide in a hole. Russian soldiers have their hands tied in the face of the attacks of the Ukrainian army. Russian soldiers surrender the occupied territories to the Ukrainian army to save their lives and flee. Russia does not only experience problems in the areas it occupies. In the past days, riots have come to light again in many cities, including the Russian capital Moscow. After Putin's defeat against the Ukrainian army, the Russian people raised the flag of rebellion and took to the streets to organize anti-Putin demonstrations. The Russian people set fire to many government buildings in Russia, especially in strategically located cities. Russian activists attacked the military recruitment buildings with Molotov cocktails during the anti-Putin demonstrations. After the action started in many cities of Russia, many Russian military recruitment offices became unusable. The reason behind the Russian people's targeting of the recruitment branches is the declaration of mobilization announced by Russian leader Putin. The Russian people have often taken to the streets to protest that Putin's declaration of mobilization was wrong. However, the Russian leader did not back down from the mobilization decision. The newly mobilized soldiers who joined the Russian army could not stand too long against the Ukrainian army. Anger against Putin escalated again as the bodies of reservists who died in Ukraine began being sent back to their homes in Russia. The Russian army caused the death of many Russian soldiers with the decision to invade Ukraine. The decisive attacks of the Ukrainian army are a sign that more than Russian troops will be neutralized in Ukraine. The strong attacks of the Ukrainian warriors, especially in Kherson in the south of this country, intimidated them. Russian soldiers do not even dare to confront the Ukrainian army in Kherson. Thousands of Russian soldiers fled the area before Ukraine's attack on Kherson. The Russian fronts are like flies. There are no soldiers left in Kherson to fight against the Ukrainian army on the Russian fronts. Russian forces divided into 100-man squadrons on the front line were left with only 68 soldiers in certain areas as Ukraine's extensive counteroffensive forced thousands of Russian soldiers to flee from previously occupied territory. Retired Deputy Air Marshal Shambel made striking statements after the Russian army's escape from Kherson. Retired Deputy Air Marshal Shambel explained that Russian documents left behind by soldiers forced out of cities in eastern and southern Ukraine showed that some of their troops have dropped 11% combat effectiveness. Shambel stated that the Russian army suffered great morale and equipment losses during the escape from the region. In addition to his statements, Shambel expected the soldiers that Russian leader Putin sent to Ukraine with mobilization to stand alone against the bad course of the Russian army. But the only problem in the Russian army is not the number of the soldiers but also the lack of military experience and trained soldiers. Shambel mentioned that the biggest problem of the Russian army in Ukraine is the lack of leaders. Mr. Bell evaluated the soldiers mobilized from the Republic of the Russian Federation. Retired Deputy Air Marshal Shambel said that Russia is actually trying to fill the troop shortage with 300,000 reservists mobilized in Bakhmut. However, these new Russian forces cannot stand alone against the Ukrainian army. They have no experience or leadership. That is, they need to strengthen existing structures. Shambel, some Russian companies have 6 to 8 men left. This is the state of their armies. Retired Deputy Air Marshal Shambel made a very important claim in including his statements. He claims that Ukraine has destroyed more than 90% of some Russian teams. If this claim of Shambel is true, it means that Putin will face a new scandal in Ukraine. Another important claim was made by Russian leader Putin in the past days. The Russian leader claimed that he would use a dirty bomb in Ukraine. NATO and the West denied the dirty bomb claim right after Putin's statement. Last Thursday, at a conference in Moscow, Vladimir Putin accused Western leaders of fomenting the war in Ukraine. Such gaslighting attempts are frequently seen by the Russian leader and his supporters. Putin downplayed the possibility of a nuclear standoff despite having made several threats to the contrary before, but noted that the Western hegemony over world affairs was over and the coming years are probably the most dangerous, unpredictable, and important at the same time. The Russian leader insisted that the Ukrainian war, which Moscow still refers to as a special military operation, would be planned as both sides prepare for a major battle in Kherson in southern Ukraine. The Russian army controls both the only land route to the Crimean Peninsula, which was captured by Russia in 2014, and the mouth of the Dnipro River, which divides Ukraine in Kherson, one of the 4 partially occupied provinces that Russia declared annexed last month, is doing. Russian-appointed leader of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, announced that work has been completed to relocate residents who want to flee from Kherson to Russia's regions ahead of the expected Ukrainian counterattack. Ukraine accused Moscow of forcibly dismissing some people and recruiting others to fight against their will. Ukrainian officials continue to persist in the Russian military's view that the evacuation from Kherson is not true. Ukrainian officials refer to the Russian army's desertions in Kherson as a so-called situation. Deployment of Russian soldiers in offices and empty houses where hospital and work equipment are removed in Kherson is seen as the biggest proof of this. Russian soldiers do not flee from Kherson, on the contrary, they take a defensive position. He noted that Sergei Kirienko, Putin's first deputy chief of staff, visited Kherson and the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant earlier this week. Ukrainian authorities announced that in recent weeks Russia has launched a wave of missile and drone strikes that have hit Ukraine's energy infrastructure and forced power outages in Kiev and elsewhere. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated in a statement last Thursday that Russian attacks will not divide Ukraine. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky said that it is more terrible to hear the anthem of the enemy on our land than the rockets of the enemy in our sky. We are not afraid of the dark. The attacks launched by the Russian military are believed to be a reaction to the recent success of the Ukrainian armed forces earlier this week, when Russia falsely accused Ukraine of planning to use a dirty bomb containing radioactive material against them. Russian President Putin is having a hard time admitting that they have failed in Ukraine. It is rather strange that Putin could not face reality as the bodies of Russian soldiers returned to their homes. During the Moscow conference, Putin made no mention of Russia's failures on the battlefield. When asked if there had been any disappointments in the past year, the Russian leader simply replied no. Winter is at the door in Ukraine, and the days ahead in the war will be very difficult. Although Ukraine and Russia state that they have completed all their preparations for the winter, both sides continue to be cautious on the Ukrainian front. Ukrainian authorities say Ukraine must win the important battle in Kherson before winter comes. A Ukrainian official said he must win the vital battle for the strategic southern city of Kherson before winter arrives, as further progress will be nearly impossible in dangerous and cold conditions. The southern regions of Ukraine, located just north of the Black Sea, are in the rainy season, which makes the use of armored vehicles difficult, and the critical battle for Kherson is expected in the imminent. If Ukraine recaptures the city, which was one of the first areas occupied by Russia, it will significantly hamper Russia's ability to supply its now frontline troops and make it significantly more difficult to mobilize Russian reserves. Mr. Budik said, "The war of Kherson will be very important for the war that Russia has started against us. It is critical that both Russian forces hold the city and Ukrainian forces recapture the city next fall. It will be very difficult to fight because of the low temperature in the winter. It will be like a natural freeze as the battle progresses. That's why we are trying to reclaim as much territory as possible before we crash." Also, Mr. Rudik said, "Kherson is a critical point for our land because it is a regional center that Russia has been able to seize since the beginning of the invasion on February 24. At a news conference on Wednesday, Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov stated that Russian forces are also using irrigation canals in the Kherson region as trenches to further slow the advance of Ukrainian troops. The winter plan of the Ukrainian army is ready. The Ukrainians will primarily try to block the incoming aid to the Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers will have to face many problems as supply routes are closed on cold winter days. As the Russian soldiers started in the winter and aid did not arrive, the escapes in Kherson seem to gain momentum. It is not a miracle that the Russian soldiers handed over Kherson to Ukraine with their own hands. Thanks for watching us.